we're gonna roll right into our presentation, and it's my pleasure to welcome Ruthie today. Ruthie is a prospect management system guru, I'll say, among other things. And we're excited to have her today to talk about how to create a prospect management system. She's an associate prospect development at Staupell Analytics Group, among many other things. And we're just so delighted that she's here to kick off our conference for us. Just a couple housekeeping things before I turn it over to Ruthie. Please remember to mute your mics. Also, if you have a question during the presentation, please either drop it in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get those questions over to Ruthie while she's giving her presentation. And there will be time at the end too for additional Q&A. So with that, Ruthie, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and I turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen so you don't have to look at me. So welcome everyone. I'm glad y'all could make it today. I know this, for some of you, this is lunch hour. So this is, giving up your lunch to join the APRA New York is a nice way to spend some time with like-minded folk. So today we're going to be talking about creating a prospect management system. As Emily said, just use the chat or the Q&A if you have any questions. I'm going to try to answer them. She'll be letting me know when they come in, and I'll try to answer them in real time during the presentation rather than waiting till the end so that we can kind of talk about it as they come up. If for some reason your question gets missed, just repost it. We'll get to it. You're going to be getting a PDF of the slides after this, and I believe a recording of the presentation perhaps. But Emily at the end can double check, she can confirm that. So we're going to get going today. So many people who don't work specifically as prospect research and management, they can't explain the difference between the two. Most of us know research has been around for quite a long time. It's that highly skilled gathering of data on constituents in order to determine what type of a prospect that constituent might be to your organization, what size gift they're going to be able to make. And research creates a picture of who they are and allows you to arm your frontline fundraiser with that information. Prospect management, that's a little newer on the scene. When I started in this field a little over 20 years ago, prospect management wasn't a thing. No one even used those terms together. But it's developed since then. And it allows us to be strategic in how we prioritize, cultivate, solicit, and steward our constituents. The goal is to have your gift officers working efficiently and effectively with the right prospects in order to have optimal results. And while most shops have adopted some form of prospect research in their team, they're now just trying to, we're now just trying to get shops to adopt having prospect management as a standard part of their team structure. It's a vital part if you want to get the best return on your investment from your team as a whole, but some shops are still resistant to it, and some shops might not feel they have the resources to do it. So that being said, so to address the lack of understanding around prospect management, APRA's created a definition, and this is a good solid definition. You can get on their website. It'll be here on the slides, so you can reference it later. If for those who haven't figured out by now, I do not read my slides to you because I figure you can read them later. So I've also created a definition of prospect management. I'm a little bit more irreverent than most folks. I absolutely love what I do, but how I see prospect management is very different than other people, but I also see us as the hub, the absolute center of the world in the fundraising office. And we help everybody because we are that perfect unicorn intersection of all the things necessary to do this work. So the key to explaining a prospect management system is that it's both strategic and a tactical approach to fundraising. I'll often explain it to gift officers in military terms, where a general's never going to go into battle without consulting the strategic tactical advisor first, determining the best approach for the battle. But I'm guessing you are more my people, so I'm going to use the Marvel analogy. So in Avengers Infinity War, there's a scene on Titan where they're battling against Thanos, and Doctor Strange uses the time stone, and he goes through like 14 million possible outcomes of Thanos's plan, figuring out how they're going to defeat Thanos. And in this analogy, project management, we're Doctor Strange, which I guess makes the gift officers the Avengers, and by default, that's the prospects or Thanos, but maybe not the most flattering for the prospects. Either way, um, in the course of the movie, Doctor Strange does this. He finds out there's only one possible solution that doesn't result in the demise of half the people in the universe. Luckily for project management, we're going to give our gift officers numerous different strategies so that they can work with their prospect to get the desired outcome. So project management from a data and reporting perspective allows the data to be documented in a more precise, uniform, and timely manner, ultimately so that our reporting can be accurate. Ooh, someone's not muted. I can hear stuff. There we go. And then from a frontline fundraiser perspective, prospect management is the process that you depend on to make your work easier, efficient, more effective, essentially allowing your office to become a well-oiled machine, if you can think of it that way. Once we know what we want or need, that we want and we need project management in our office, there's the matter of getting buy-in, both from leadership and from the gift officers. Over the years, I've heard all the reasons, or you could probably call them excuses, as to why leadership or gift officers aren't initially on board with implementing a project management system. Some of them might think that project management is trying to vie for power. We're not. We don't want to be. That's not our thing. Others think that project management is veering from a system that already works fine and doesn't need fixing. The clever folks on your team are going to understand that implementing project management is critical to keeping pace with the entire nonprofit industry. Because even though you might not be using project management, I can guarantee some of your peer organizations already are using it. They're courting the same donors, and they're doing it more efficiently, more effectively, and thus more successfully. So in order to keep up with them so that we're courting the same donors and getting a little bit more of those donation dollars of their philanthropic giving, we needed to give ourselves that competitive edge. So we need to implement project management just to keep up with the other orgs that already are doing it. So it's sort of a keeping up with the Joneses, but it's also keeping up with the industry. So we're not just trying to keep up with our peer organizations. We're trying to make sure that we don't get left behind in the nonprofit industry as a whole. So we're going to address the elephant in the room when it comes to project management. Often when you begin creating a project management system, your colleagues are going to wonder why you're doing it. No matter how well communicated that is to your colleagues, the purpose of your task is, there's some folks on the team who are just going to sort of seem suspicious about it. And at the root of that, the true elephant in the room is that people are people and they worry about their job security. So they think that the true purpose of your project management system is to measure performance metrics. It's not, but truth be told, some aspects of the system can be used to help measure performance. And with the project management system in place, it's going to be clear who's underperforming and what areas they're underperforming in. So that in mind, the ultimate goal again of the system is not performance metrics. Your system is being put in place to help make the gift officers' jobs easier by focusing on the right prospects and how to move them along in a most efficient, effective, strategic manner. If your system works well, and if your gift officers are doing their jobs well, which most of them are, of course, the system's going to aid your gift officers in becoming incredibly high performers. And while the system will shed a light on some of the officers who might be underperforming in certain areas, a very good director, and let's hope you are or you have very good directors, is going to use that as an opportunity to mentor those gift officers and help them develop those skill sets and help them in those areas where they are weak, because we do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That is not what the system's about. It's an improvement. We're looking for improvement, including making sure those gift officers have the skills they need. So they may worry this is about their job performance. It should not be. framed as that, and you want to make sure that anyone who's managing the gift officers also understands that. So there are some considerations when we're going into this. And for the small shop, when you're thinking about implementing a project management system, there's a whole lot of things that may become obstacles to being successful in doing this. In a small shop, you might be project research and project management and advancement services and the gift processor. So you're doing 4, actually it's more like 7 in there because you have a couple of each, but you're doing multiple jobs. You don't have enough time to do the work. Reactive research or work is a priority because we have to get stuff done now. Folks want us to identify new prospects. And then when there's changes in leadership or in staffing, especially if it's at the leadership level, that can be very disruptive just because, data management processes and the overall goals may not be consistent over time when there's staff turnover. I'm thinking specifically in leadership levels. Again, sometimes project management just isn't well understood. The gift officers think we're trying to tell them how to do their jobs, and all we're really trying to do is attempting to be their strategic partners. And then, there might not be any buy-in from the top. You can still do this if there's no buy-in from the top. We'll get into that. But these are all the things that in a small shop you're going to bump into or smash into as far as obstacles. And in spite of these challenges, you can implement project management in any shop of any size, even if you don't have buy-in from the top. It's just a matter of how long these things take and how, do you have to do it in small incremental bite-sized pieces, or can you do it all in one big swath? So this can be done no matter what, because I've done it both ways. So I know of what I speak. Other things that every shop needs to think about. Some of you are going to be building your project management systems from the ground up. Others are going to be building upon elements of the system that are already in place. And without buying them from the top, you can do this, but it's going to be done more slowly, small piece at a time. Needs to be introduced. Every time you make a small change or modification, you have to introduce it, and that takes time too. So in the non-buy-in landscape, it is possible that every little change is going to have to go through, it's going to be more involved to get it approved, to get it implemented. But if you're not hitting a wall, keep going forward, because slow progress is still progress. So it's kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts in some ways, but you're still moving forward. So as long as no one's halting your progress, even if you feel like you're a herd of turtles, go for it. No matter what your current situation, as you create your project management system, everything you build or add or enhance, it should be an improvement on what you already have in place. You do not want to mess up the stuff that's already working well, that's in place. You're just improving upon it. So you're not changing everything, you're just fixing and improving, right? Talk to your frontline fundraisers about their challenges and their goals, because you're going to need to understand what it is that's stopping them from reaching their goals or slowing them down from reaching their goals. And half of this uphill battle can simply be won by understanding the capacity and limitations of your database, solving the issues of data that needs to be tracked or needs to be tracked better. These are smaller process improvements that will slowly move you towards having your project management system, especially in a non-buy-in environment. So the key is to becoming that ultimate data problem solver within your office. You're the go-to person who helps figure out the best way to track data, track prospects, figure out portfolios. Once they start seeing you in that light, it's going to get really easy to keep moving forward with your project management system. So once you get past some of those considerations, and of course that big old elephant in the room, you're going to need to start working on creating partnerships with all segments of your office that work with prospect data, which is everyone in your office. And when I say everyone, I am including the administrative assistants. That's why they're at the top of the list on the slide. They're often the first to receive the calls. They're the ones that pull the information. They finalize reports. They meet and greet people at events at the reception booth. They are the lifeblood of your office. They are the unsung heroes. Include them as you're putting the system together, because they know what's going on, and they are the end user for a lot of the things you're going to be putting in place. And I put corporations and foundations at the end of the list, not because they aren't important, but because you might not need to build as strong of a partnership with them simply due to the nature of their work. if you even have that segment within your office. Some people do, some don't. But there is value in creating the partnership because there's always an element of overlap with the work. So while it doesn't matter what order anyone is on this list, I put admins in the top because I love them. But you want to make sure you create partnerships with everybody. And the main question you're going to need to answer with each area is what's in it for them. So as you begin to build these partnerships, you talk with your colleagues about what the benefits of your project management system will have for their daily work. Because if they don't understand what's in it for them, they're not going to want to go forward with this. So before you even create your system, you want to really get to know your database. No matter which database you're using, each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, quirks and shortcomings, right? And in spite of whether or not we even like our current database, some of us are battling with one we don't particularly agree with right now, perhaps. In spite of all that, we need to understand all of the nuances of our database so we can decide how to enter our data in a way that we can pull it out, analyze it, and report on it. And again, I know some of our databases aren't as easy to do that with as others. I get that. The system you're creating is tended, again, to be an improvement upon whatever processes are already in place. And in order to make improvements, you have to have that firm understanding of what's in your database now, how is it currently being used, and what are the capabilities of your database, including the things you might not be using in your database right now. You also need to know how people are using the data that's currently stored in your database, because not everyone uses it in the same way or for the same purpose. I know that seems a little strange sometimes, but there are pieces of data that two different groups may be using two different ways, even though it's the same piece of data. Every process that's in place should, in theory, be documented and understood by all of those using that process, but you might find that interpretations vary and documentation doesn't exist. So you're going to need to know where sort of those gray areas are in order to improve upon them, and by documentation and educating everyone in the same way on them. So in essence, you become the expert on your database. You can't improve on something if you don't understand it thoroughly. And you need to know what works and how it works. And here's some examples on the slide of just of things you might want to start looking at within your own database. And again, you're going to get a copy of the slide so you don't have to try to frantically write it down or take screenshots. You also need to understand what's missing, what's not working. Once you know what works well and what doesn't work well, what's missing, what doesn't, what's not there, what you're not even collecting, you can create solutions and workarounds in order to get the data into your database. And for those of us with those sort of crankier databases, get the database to bend to your will. So you're going to create the solutions to get you there. So talking about terminology, you're going to be surprised at how people working at the same organization do not have the same understanding of a term, a category, a code. This happens for a number of reasons. The primary one being staff turnover. So we come to an organization from wherever we worked before, and we bring our definitions and our understanding of things from there. And the more often that happens, the more muddy the water can become. Especially if there's no onboarding or not very great onboarding for new employees. And this is not a criticism, like it's just onboarding sometimes it's hard to do it really well, and some places do it pretty good. But if the onboarding isn't great and we're not talking about how the terminology is at your organization, new employees aren't going to know. So they're just bringing what they know from other places before them. And then the most common reason why terminology can be sort of a tricky area is it's never been defined. No one's written it down, had someone validate it, have it approved by leadership, updated it when things change. So at the end of the day, when things are not clearly defined, you get a lot of gray area on things that each individual might assume is crystal clear. We assume that everyone knows what we mean by a certain term, and these assumptions are going to lead to larger misunderstandings between colleagues. We've all been there. As an example, one organization I used to work at, I asked all of the gift officers and their director independently, so no one else heard what I asked or how they answered it. I asked them all to define what a major gift was. I got a different answer from every single person, including their supervisor. Um, and that's not a criticism of that organization. That's just a result of the fact that they didn't have written definitions. So write them down. There's a lot of value in writing them down and sharing those definitions throughout your department. It's going to eliminate that gray area. It's going to make your communications much clearer between colleagues, regardless of how long you've been at the organization. Even if you've been there 10 years, start writing down your terms and defining them. Because when that new person shows up next month, next quarter, next year, they need to know, how do you define major gift? It's important for everyone to have that shared understanding because it's going to, and this begins with those clear definitions on how terminology is used at your organization. You also need to have one person who writes it down, who edits the definitions. You don't want too many cooks in this kitchen, right? And then you run those definitions by a subset of your larger team to get some input, some feedback. And then that one person goes back and edits. The only one has the access to edit those things. Once you have those definitions solid, you put them someplace where everyone has access to them. Shared drive, searchable PDF. If you have an intranet, it doesn't matter where you put them. There's some examples on the screen of places you might want to store these kind of things. But store it someplace where everyone has access to it so it becomes the reference doc and it becomes the onboarding piece for those new employees so they can learn your language. Types of terminology you need to start defining. I would say that you start with some of the real basic broad terms and then get more granular because you could go bonkers trying to define every single word, right? There may be terms that are very specific to your organization or your process. Make sure you define those. For example, you may use society names that indicate what type of a donor a person has been to your organization. And you need to define what the Ruth Giles Society is and why it's different from the Warren Buffett Society. The difference between those two should be pretty obvious. But point being, if someone doesn't know your organization, they're brand new. If it's not defined, they're not going to know. So there's a list on the slide to help you get started. And again, you're going to get the slides of what types of things to define. So your types of prospects, types of ratings, what makes a gift capacity rating versus a wealth screening rating versus a campaign target rating. Different types of ratings. You want to make sure you define those. Assignment types. So what's a prospect manager versus secondary manager versus a proposal manager? Maybe you have these different types, maybe you don't. And then cultivation stages, I'm going to talk more in depth about that in a few slides, but that's the heart of your prospect management system. So again, here's just a short, quick list of terms here that help you get started. And when I say define everything, no matter how obvious it is, I mean define everything. So this is the actual definition after I asked all those gift officers and their supervisor what was a major gift. They call it leadership level there. But this is the definition we came up with finally. And they may have changed it since then as the world has changed. This was almost 10 years ago. But this is where they started with finally we had a written definition and everyone knew, and they could almost rattle this off after a while because every time said, oh, what's a leadership gift? I would just say it verbatim. And eventually they all learned it. So having it written down, so valuable. All right. So talking about portfolios. When you are creating or right-sizing portfolios, there are a lot of questions that need to be addressed. And I'd love to give you some finite answers to the questions on this slide. The reality is the answer is going to be a lot of it depends, right? Because no two organizations are the same in how they function and how they're staffed or in their process. You're going to need to find the answers to these questions and more that are custom fit to your specific organization. Depending on where one falls in the org chart, there seems to be differing thoughts on how a portfolio should be created, meaning who should be included inside that portfolio, and how large or not that portfolio should be. So maybe your chief advancement officer, person with the big title, has a small but a portfolio of very wealthy people, while your junior level gift officer has a big portfolio of, much bigger portfolio and not as high level as far as capacity ratings. There will be differences. I think we can all agree that we want to maximize the return on investment. So we want our best prospects in the portfolio, but what's meant by best, right? As we all know, There are other factors at play. You're in a campaign. Your gift officers don't want to give up some of their assignments. Top leadership is under pressure from a board or executive director or president to do things a certain way. So there's always other factors at play. So I'm assuming some of you have heard of Dunbar's number. This is a number that was proposed in the 90s by a British anthropologist, Robin Dunbar. You can Google her and find all that out. It was a correlation between primates' brains and the average size social group. I'm going to bring this around now. This number it's been challenged, but setting that aside, this is a good rule of thumb for the size of a portfolio. Now, when I look at the number 150, for me, that's kind of the max size of the portfolio. I would prefer something personally in like the 50 to 75 range, because 150 is the max number, as you see on the screen, of relationships a person can maintain. So that includes their entire portfolio, all the people they work with, their friends, their mom, and their dentist, right? It includes everybody. So 150 is a lot of relationships to keep track of in your head or in a database, right? It's still a lot of information to be managing. So we don't want to max out our gift officers at 150. If we can talk the people higher up into having smaller portfolios for our gift officers, and we're going to make them really good portfolios, then a smaller number than 150 would be probably better for your gift officers. If you've taken the time to create your prospect management system, if you've identified your terms well, the prospect management system is the tool that's going to help you create and right-size your portfolios. You want to make sure that your gift officer is set up for success, so we don't overload their portfolio with a lot of white noise. It doesn't allow them to do their most effective or efficient work. We do need to put some sort of quote-unquote low-hanging fruit into their portfolio, as well as some potentially worthwhile long-term challenges into their mix. To help remove some of the white noise, you want to look at the data, removing, and remove any of that sort of personally identifying information. Just see the story the data tells about the prospect. Because once you take the name off of it, the gift officer can see them a little bit more empirically. Once you throw the name in there, they're like, oh, I had lunch with her. She was lovely. She has 5 cats. She owns a horse farm. Okay, but, that's, let's not muddy the water. Let's look at the data and see, does she need to be in your portfolio, right? And then let's talk about disqualifications. Ugh, I have encountered organizations with portfolios as large as 2,000. One person had a portfolio of just over 2,000. And if you're not gasping, you should be. We need to get comfortable as an industry of letting people go from the portfolio. We need to stop stacking portfolios with constituents who are just never going to give to our organization. For example, for most of us, you could put Warren Buffett into your prospect pool and assign him. But unless you're that 1 or 7 different organizations that really has some sort of attachment and engagement with Warren, he's just taken up space in a portfolio. Yes, on paper, he looks like a viable prospect, but he's not your prospect. So you got to let him go. Stop waiting for that closed door to open when there's a perfectly good open door right next to you, right? There's sort of this stigma attached to letting people go from a portfolio. And just that nonsense needs to end. By removing them from that sort of major or principal or leadership gift portfolio, it allows to put the constituent into the right place. So we're cultivating them at their level, stewarding them at their level, who they are and how they're giving, right? We want to be donor-centric with this. We also cannot keep going back to the same set of donors ad nauseum, because at some point, they're going to be done giving to us, and we'll have missed the chance to properly cultivate and steward the next set of amazing donors. So a lot of folks are still looking at people. I'm thinking, if you're in education, and there's reasons to do so because some of them are still good, but if you're looking at people primarily in the 60s and the 70s classes, you got to start looking at the 90s and the zeros. They're not as young as you think. But you got to start looking at those folks because that's the next group. I know I skipped over the 70s and they're important too. But you got to look at that next group of people because you're going to need them to fill when these folks, age out of your portfolio, I think is a nice way to put it. Sometimes the worry is that the annual fund does a lion's share of the work to cultivate a great annual fund donor, and then they get moved to major gifts and there's sort of no credit giving to that foundational work. We've got to stop self-sabotaging our teams. Credit is important to a degree, but we're supposed to be working as a team, right? So gift credit should not be the be all end all of those sort of key performance indicators. It creates some unnecessary competition, which leads to hoarding of prospects, and it damages the whole, that whole damaging cycle just keeps continuing. I've watched this go on through a number of organizations over multiple decades, and it truly does more damage than good. So let's allow us to disqualify people. Let's not worry so much about the gift credit, and let's work as the team that we're supposed to be. All right, soapbox moment done. Prospect stages. We're all familiar with the pipeline. Although, honestly, when we draw this circle, right? So we never draw it as a pipe. I don't know why we call it a pipeline. At any rate, it's we know this is that cycle, and it has numerous ways for prospects to move forward. Also, they off ramp from the cycle, move to different programs. So when we find out after sort of the identification process, they aren't a major gift, they off ramp over to annual fund or planned giving, some other area. But I just lost my train of thought as I'm talking about off ramps. How funny. So we want to try to sort of keep donors moving in their, keep with the donors and keep them moving, actually giving in their matching with their interests and abilities. So while we have this pipeline, aka circle, cycle, we do want to make sure we're moving people to annual fund, to planned giving, to I don't care what you call it, permanent stewardship, perpetual stewardship, but like long-term stewardship of folks who've made their big gift. They're just not going to do the big gift again, but they've been highly generous, so you want to keep stewarding them, moving them to the right place. We also know that the donor cycle, sometimes people move backwards. So I know this one shows it with the forward arrows, but sometimes people move backwards through the cycle. To keep all of those moves, the off ramps, the backward action in check, and to keep your entire team on the same page, the absolute heart of your prospect management system is going to be talking about the stages and how you define them. Oh, this is my favorite thing. So, as a matter of full disclosure, I borrowed the basis of this concept from a presentation that was it Dan Lohman, GGNA. He gave this to it at a NEDVR conference, I think in like 2013. I don't remember when, but back around then. At any rate, I took his concept and modified it to suit my needs for creating project management systems. And I stand by this as the absolute center of any good project management system. You need to be able to define all of this for each stage in your cultivation cycle. It's critical. It's going to guide the work that your gift officers do. It's going to remove the ambiguity of the how, why, when your prospect moves or doesn't move through that cultivation cycle. And these are the 5 essential elements to defining your cultivation stages. The define your stage, how do you enter it, how do you exit it, what's the time frame, and then what data needs to be entered or updated in your database. That's important. You should be as detailed in defining your stages as you need to be in order to suit your organization's needs. Being detailed is going to help you to answer the majority of questions that come your way. And as far as how many cultivation stages you have in your cycle, it may vary. I've seen as few as 4 and as many as 8. I tend to live in like the 5 to 6 zone usually, but depending on your org, you may need a few more stages, you may need a few less. So how many stages you have isn't going to matter, but define them all. And I know this is going to be small for you to see. You're going to get copies of these. And if you're on a laptop trying to squint at this, I'm sorry. But I wanted to give you a sample of what defining your cultivation stages looks like. This is exactly the definition I wrote years ago when I worked at Mount Holyoke College. They had a stage called evaluated. I think most people think of that as the first stage. Some of us call it identify, some of us call it qualification, whatever you call it. It's the first stage in their cycle. They may have rewritten it and they may have modified it. They may have changed databases since then. But when I wrote this was accurate. I wrote it from scratch when I created their system, and I tailored it to their process, to their terminology, and to their database. You're going to notice, if you really look and squint, for those of you on the small screens, If you look at the time frames, there's one time frame for alumna, because it's a all women's college, alumna, and one for parents. Two different time frames. So you may have different types of prospects, segments that you move through at slightly different paces. Write that into your stages. Write it in. And again, as you tailor this to your organization so that it works for your constituents in the way that makes sense for your organization, right? And hopefully this example is going to be it's a stepping off point to help you as you start to, you know, say how you want to define how things are at your organization. You do not have to do it exactly this way. Tailor it to your needs. This worked for me at Mount Holyoke almost 10 years ago. It may not work there now, and it may not work for your organization, but this is a nice sample to start with. So one of the most important end products of a good prospect management system is that your reports are highly accurate. Accurate reports that show where you are and allow you to plan ahead for where you're hoping to go. Accurate reports also show us where we're struggling so that we can address that and create solutions for it. Here's I'm going to show you a couple of sample reports. All of them are created in Excel. Most of them were created off of pivot tables. This one specifically is a screenshot of an Excel pivot table I did. Also when I worked at Mount Holyoke. And I changed the numbers, but the sample's the same. So these are just ways that you want to be looking at your portfolios when you sit down with your gift officers and their supervisor at times to see where are we? How are we doing? Where are we going? Where are things stuck? Not so much where the gift officer is stuck, because the gift officer is trying to wrangle all the cats in their portfolio. So sometimes the stuck isn't the gift officer, it's the donor. So we need to figure out how to move them. And if we can see where they're stuck, we can start to create strategies, right? So this is just another sample report comparing one gift officer portfolio to the next based on the stages, gift capacity, average capacity rating. If you're hoping to create equity between your gift officer portfolios, this is a nice way to look at them so you can start to even them out a little bit. Knowing full well that some gift officers will carry bigger portfolios than others. Your head of the office might be the smallest portfolio. Your new junior level gift officer might be the biggest. But even at that, you want to see if their gift capacity ratings are equitable, if the average capacity ratings are somewhat equitable, right? This sample report breaks out the portfolio by gift capacity rating and level, and it calculates sort of a very fictitious and a highly ambitious expected gift amount. I just put this together in Excel and did a little math for fun. But you can create this and use real numbers and real percentage rated value, right? For your own. 20 is really high, but I needed a round number. I like round numbers. So creating these, again, you can do these in Excel, add the data in your database once you've worked to get your project management system up and running. And then once you work on meetings with your gift officers, it's the other piece of the puzzle. Once we've created our system, we have our desired reports created and in place. We need to make sure we keep that system on track. And how do we do that? Meetings. And I know no one likes meetings, but these meetings are going to be good. We want to implement and utilize a few key types of meetings, and we want to do this part really well. Nobody likes meetings. I believe the reason for that is because so few meetings are actually run really well. We've all been to that meeting where there's no agenda, or it's the most basic agenda. We all end up going around the table, reporting out, or around the Zoom these days, reporting out on things that could have been a memo. Oh my God, stop encouraging this. Those are not meetings. 3 points laid out on the screen. These are the keystones of well-run prospect management meetings. Potentially other meetings too, but someone's got to lead the pack in prospect management meetings. If you can be the shining example of how meetings are run, other meetings might get better. First, we're going to change our language. For the love of Ben and Jerry, or your holy entity of choice, stop calling them review meetings. We're not reviewing anything. We are creating strategies. So we're not reviewing anything anymore. It's an antiquated way of looking at things. That term has been around for decades, and some people are still hanging on to them. But I am a one-woman force of nature trying to change the entire industry to calling them strategy meetings, because that's what they are, and that's what they need to be. So, that being said, here's my general recommendation on what meetings to have and how often to have them. There's just three types of meetings. Depending on the size of your organization and whether or not you're in a campaign, your meeting frequency and the length of the meeting is going to vary. For the strategy meetings, these meetings are not cattle calls. There's no point in attending the meeting simply because you have a nice title or because someone wants to be inclusive. Only have someone come there if they're going to be able to have constructive contributions to the discussion around the strategy. If you're talking about people if you're the names you're bringing to the table that day to talk about strategy for, if someone that you're inviting, they have no connection to that person, do not waste their time, right? Do not waste their time. They have other things to do. You are working as a team. Be strategic about who attends the meetings, right? So let's talk about the types of meetings I like to do. So the data optimization meeting. This is typically just you as that project management person and the gift officer. When I do these, I've done them, in the before times at my desk. I have the database open on one screen, Excel open on the other, and we just sit there and have a little chat. We go over some pieces of data and we look at things and they say, oh, I already talked to them. They need to move here. Or, oh, whoops, something's happened in their life. We need to do them back because we're not going to solicit them for a while. So we start updating the data right there on the fly. The gift officer walks out of the meeting knowing that their data is updated. You know that the data is updated. No one has any work to do after that meeting. It's awesome. And these can take 15 minutes, half hour, depends on how much data you're trying to clean up. But they can be as short or as long as you need them to be. Again, make sure you're using the time wisely. The next type of meeting I like, portfolio strategy meetings. In advance of these meetings, project management, you're going to do a lot of prep work. You should have reviewed the portfolio you're going to be talking about. Review it by segments. Create some sort of visuals with statistics to show the gift officer that overall view of their portfolio. Look at some targeted segments within that portfolio, and then create strategies for the constituents in those segments. Those types of things. Being well prepared in advance, it takes a lot of time and effort on your part, but it helps the meeting run smoothly and efficiently. And you've been studying the data in depth as you prepare for these meetings, so you're able to handle all the questions that are going to arise during that actual meeting. And your gift officer is going to walk away knowing that their portfolio is in good shape, right? Knowing where they're moving forward with things because you have created strategies for them. And you've hopefully aligned some of the strategies with the overall fundraising strategy of your office. Prospect strategy meetings. For this meeting, project management, you're also going to need to do a lot of work in advance to prepare. But again, being well prepared is going to pay off in the long run. Helps us, helps the meeting to move along faster. And you're making good use of everyone's time while they're in the meeting. These meetings often are more like discussions, and you have to be well prepared. The discussion shouldn't feel too forced. Make sure someone's taking notes, not just prospect management. Hopefully, some of the gift officers taking notes. The gift officer who's responsible for the person you're discussing in the meeting should be taking copious notes, right? Because you are helping them create strategies for their individual prospects. So when you're creating your prospect management system, it's a large project. And there are a lot of places you could be tempted to begin because you're like, oh, I can fix this, oh, I can fix that. Before launching into anything, do a needs assessment first. So with your needs assessment, you talk to, like we discussed much earlier, talk to all the people in your office, find out what's working, what's not. Do all that work first. Then once you've finished your needs assessment, you can sort of choose your adventure. Where in that project management system, what do you want to take on first? Focus on what you need now. Low-hanging fruit, easy wins, gets people's buy-in in those non-buy-in environments. And the one thing I would shy away from doing is locking yourself into timelines and deadlines. Head of your office, your supervisors, they're going to say, when's this going to be done? When's this going to be done? When's this going to be done? Yes, it will be done, but they can take months to do this, right? This can take a year to put together a really good prospect management system. This is not the kind of work we want to rush. We want to get it right the first time. Slow progress, still progress. I love to say that, especially when I work out at the gym. Slow progress, still progress. So manage others' expectations. These things take time. You will build something and then you might tear it down just a little bit and rebuild because you found something else out that you need to accommodate for. So it's going to take a little time to build it and build it right. And then every year you're going to review it and every year you're going to update it because every year something changes. Back in the before times, way before, when I first started building project management systems, the idea of a virtual meeting didn't exist because there was no Zoom, there were no Teams, Microsoft Teams. There was no way to do that. Not really easy. I think Skype was just starting out. So most people weren't doing virtual meetings. It was really weird. Most people didn't have the technology. People weren't comfortable with it. Now it's a thing. We can account for that. We can track it. So again, your system's going to change over time. It's okay. But you want to edit it every year to make sure that you're accommodating for those pieces. So we have come to the end of my slides, and I've left some time for questions, comments. I know there might be something in the Q&A or the chat, but I'm going to leave this slide up for just a moment. And if there's any questions, comments, confusion, we can talk about that now.
Thanks, Ruthie. So feel free to, if you have questions, to either put them in the chat or the Q&A. I can toggle between both. So Ruthie, while people are possibly gathering up their questions, what, thinking about prospect management systems, and doing the need assessment, and after you've actually created the prospect management system, what is some advice to actually get the stakeholders, especially when I say stakeholders, I mean executive leadership team, on board with this?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So hopefully by the time it's entirely done, they're already on board. There will be a few, like there's always the early adopter, right? There's that one person, and it may not be leadership, who understands what you're doing, understands why you're doing it, and they jump right on board even before your system's done. They're like, I want this to work. I want this to work. They are your best champion, and they also become your guinea pig to a degree because you test a few things out, and if it doesn't work, but they're your champion because they are on board with what you're doing. Once you see success with that early adopter, or in some cases you have a couple early adopters if you're fortunate, you can show that to top leadership and say, because we're doing this differently, here are the new results that are coming up. Because we're doing this differently, she was able to move prospects through faster. Because we're doing this differently, she was able to have these different conversations. She was able to look at this new prospect she would have never seen before because they didn't rise to the top because she had 2,000 people in her portfolio, right? So once you start seeing those little moments, and they may be little moments, it may not be a $5 million gift came in, but it's we finally got in front of so and so, or we finally had that critical conversation and we brought in the trustee that we needed to help us with that. Like using those, once the system is built and you're using those strategy moments to create the strategies, those early adopters are going to be your champions. Leadership will see the value in it. I've created this without buy-in in a solo shop. Oh, not recommended. It's not a lot of fun, but you do need to do it anyhow. And they didn't know what I was doing because the terminology for project management didn't exist. I was just creating stuff to make work better. There was no term for what we were doing at that point. And once they saw how that work was going, they liked it. And they said, well, what else can we do to fix this? What else can we do to make things better? So once they start seeing those little process improvement moments, they'll slowly start to come on board. There's always going to be one person who's the holdout. And don't worry about them. Not because they're not important, but because in time they'll either jump in or move on, is really what I've seen happen. And I don't see move on thinking that we're trying to get rid of staff. Just it may not be the flavor they want, but if they're not moving with your organization forward, they might find somewhere else that's a better fit. So
Yeah.
that has happened.
Where do you actually house your prospect management system? I mean, do you share it at various points with members of your team so that they know it's there? Do you email it out to everyone when it's final and complete? Do you have it on like a data store or a shared server or something? How often do you kind of mention it, pull information from it, like in the various meetings that you talk about? How much do you incorporate it into your everyday process?
So your project management system is the process. You have documentation on how it's done, but the data and that you pull from and you look at and you're using to create the strategy meetings that you do all the work with, it's your database,
That's your
which is,
CRM,
yeah.
right?
So that's why it's so important to know your database inside and out, because that's what you're pulling everything out of to create your reporting, to create your, the analysis to see like whose portfolio is way too big, who has too many people who are in cultivation. Let's balance it out so they have a few more people who aren't. Yeah, if all your prospects are in cultivation and a portfolio, that's sort of a deflating thing for a gift officer because they're always trying to start conversations and they're never getting to that happy spot where they're like, woohoo, I brought in the gift. We need to give those easy wins to them. So just seeing like, oh my God, we've we've got a chock full of cultivation folks in their portfolio, but no one who's near the gift giving point. You can balance their portfolio a little bit better. But it's all in the CRM and then the documentation backs it up.
Um, I feel like I'm hoarding all the time, but there isn't any. I haven't seen any chats.
That's
I
okay.
haven't seen any chat or Q&A questions come through. Oh, I got one. Okay.
We got one.
Just now. Okay, this is from Lauren Dasher. In terms of where to begin, where would a new prospect research system fit into creating the prospect management process?
Where would a
And then
new
also, yeah, so do you want me to repeat that, or
so where would a new prospect research
system
system?
fit into creating the prospect management process? So I'm wondering if maybe she means here the actual written document, perhaps, um, in terms of where, well, or I can always ask Lauren to maybe go into a little bit more detail about what she's asking there. Another question did come through though from Larissa Power. How do you manage a development team that wants to change definitions of stages frequently? What's the best way to get staff to follow the new definitions?
So I'm gonna stop sharing. All right. That way I can see people if they want to be on camera. Um, so they want to keep changing the names of the stages and they do it often. Um, my impulse is to sort of reach over, smack them on the snout like you would like a bad dog. I would never hit my dog and say, stop it. But you can't do that kind of thing. So you have to more pragmatically say, you know what? It doesn't matter if we call this aardvarks or kumquats or Rubik's cubes, whatever we call it, as long as we define it, and we know what it is, you can call it anything you want. And that seems to get them to stop being so weird about how do we name things. Some people are still weird about it, but people get so stuck on the word and the term. The definition is what matters. So I don't care if your stages are 1 through 5. I don't care if they're identified through stewardship. As long as everyone knows what 1 through 5 means or identified through stewardship means. But if they keep changing the names, then you just have to tell them, that's great, but we're only going to change them once a year. And then do not change your document. Like, be stubborn. And it's hard because we're not always in positions of any power, but try to hold your ground with, like, we can change a definition once a year, which is still kind of goofy. But eventually they'll understand, like, it doesn't matter what we call it, as long as we know what it is, the definition matters more than the term. And if we can get that across, that will be helpful.
Okay, great. So we have a couple of questions that have come in through chat. So we have Sue
Sure.
Ann is asking, do you have a recommendation for prospect pools in regard to percentage of those in each stage? I.e. 70% as identification, 15% as something, another
Gotcha.
qualification, something like that.
I think it depends on where a lot of these, unfortunately, the answer is it depends, which sounds like a cop out, but I'm not wrong. It's going to depend on your organization. If you're a younger or you haven't done a lot of prospect research, I think someone had earlier asked the question you were saying about prospect research new system. Maybe that's what she meant. If you haven't done a lot of prospect research, um, you may not be able to say, well, we have so many identified, so many qualified, because no one's done the research to identify anybody. So even though you're still bringing gifts, right? You can do that without research having had happened. Um, Working in an organization where we don't have any gift capacity ratings at all, and I've done research on 10 people in 3 years. So I know of what I speak. Knowing where people go in those categories is going to depend on your organization. For those with a more mature gift capacity rating, prospect research system, you want it to be a little more balanced. You know, that sort of the bell curve with the hump in the middle. You want some people who are brand new, some people are in stewardship, and the rest are sort of humped in that middle, right? And which percentage, again, it's going to depend also on like which kind of a gift officer you are. Are you the most senior gift officer with just like the best, richest prospects? Or are you the most junior one? You're going to have the hardest time because a lot of yours are still in cultivation. So your bell curve may be skewed to one side or the other. Yeah.
Great. Okay, we have another question
Sure.
from Margaret Esperanza Lee. We are hiring a new director. What important question or questions should we be asking about prospect research management when interviewing?
I would ask them what their experience has been using prospect management. Um, Also prospect research, because sometimes you can't have one without the other. But I ask them what their experience is and listen to their answer and then base some other questions off of that. If they don't have much experience with it, that doesn't tell you that they're a terrible person to hire. It just tells you that you will need to educate them when you do bring them on board. And so you will want to make sure that you have a lot of documentation for the onboarding. If they have a lot of background with it, then you want to know, okay, well, what did you do? Did you create the system? Were you in an organization? You came in after the system had been built. How did you feel about the system? How was it working? What worked? What didn't? So more probing questions there. If they've never worked with prospect management, it's just telling you that when they come on board, you're going to need to educate them a little bit, which gives you time to put together, cute little PowerPoints with Marvel characters and Dilbert, things like that. So it gives you some time to put some pieces together for them so that you can bring them up to speed very quickly because they're not going to have a lot of time to not be on board fast, right? Yeah.
I don't see anything else. The only other comments I have now are just a lot of thank yous
Oh,
for a great presentation and for your responses today. Let me just check one more. Any suggestions on how to get management to accept lower portfolio numbers?
oh, yeah, that's a hard one to have, a hard conversation to have. You will not always win that the first, the second, or the fifth time around, perhaps. But you need to back it up by saying other people say, other organizations are doing this. So go to, like, I know there are sources you can go to, different listservs, um, different forums you can find. You can just go old school, pick up the phone and call somebody, right? Um, Talk to other people who have smaller portfolios, find out what their portfolio size is at similar organizations. So if you are a human rights organization, call another human rights organization of a similar size and say, what do your portfolio sizes look like? And then you can either envy them or they can, sympathize with them if they're the same size as yours. But sometimes it takes a while and it takes some backup to get them to downsize your portfolios. So prove that it works other places and use other places that they're going to be like, oh, well, if let's see, use the penultimate university, Harvard, Yale's, Princeton's of the world are doing it, we should too. I honestly don't know what size their portfolios are, but use the organizations that you know will speak to and have some leverage with your leadership. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're just at 1 o'clock now. Ruthie, a huge, huge, huge thank you on behalf of APRA New York and all of the conference attendees this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
As a reminder, everyone will be sending out Ruthie's fabulous slides and a recording of this presentation on the other side of the conference later this week. Again, thank you. Go stretch a little bit, and hopefully we'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock for our next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. You've been great.
Thanks.
I'll just hang out in case there's a last minute question. Probably not.